It was supposed to be a chill Friday night, one of those rare evenings where I had the whole house to myself. No siblings yelling, no parents nagging, just me, a bowl of popcorn, and a horror movie I probably had no business watching alone. I was 17, practically an adult in my own mind, and my parents had gone out of town for the weekend to celebrate their anniversary. They were only 2 hours away, but far enough that I felt like I had the run of the place. The house itself sat near the edge of a small town, flanked by woods that stretched out behind it for miles, and while it wasn't completely isolated, the nearest neighbor was a good 15-minute walk down a winding gravel road. Normally that kind of seclusion was something I liked. It made everything feel private, peaceful. But that night, that silence started to feel heavier than usual. I was lounging on the couch, watching The Ring for the 3rd time that year, the only light coming from the flickering TV screen and a dim lamp in the corner when I first heard it. A soft knock at the back door. I paused the movie, heart already doing this stupid little double beat thing, and sat up. I waited, thinking maybe it was just the wind or a branch tapping against the glass. But then it came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not on the front door where any normal person would come. No, these came from the back door, the one that opened out to the woods, the one that almost no one used. I stood there for a moment, frozen, unsure if I should answer it or just pretend I wasn't home, but curiosity got the better of me. I crept into the kitchen, which had a full view of the door through the glass panes that framed it. At first, I didn't see anyone, just darkness pressing in against the glass, the faint outline of trees swaying in the wind. But then, just as I was about to turn away, something shifted in the shadows. A figure, tall, still, and definitely not someone I recognized, stood just a few feet from the door, barely illuminated by the outside porch light I had left on earlier. I couldn't make out his face, but I could tell he was wearing something bulky like a coat with a hood pulled up. My breath caught in my throat. Who the hell just stands at someone's back door like that without saying anything? I stayed absolutely still, hoping maybe he hadn't seen me. But then he stepped closer, out of the shadow, and raised his hand, slowly, pressing it flat against the glass as if testing the barrier between us. I stumbled back, bumping into the kitchen counter, and the noise must have alerted him because he turned his head slightly and stared directly at me. I still couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw his mouth move. He was saying something, though I couldn't hear it. I hesitated, then grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. She told me to stay on the line and go somewhere safe in the house, lock the doors, wait for police. I told her all the doors were already locked, and I backed away from the kitchen into the hallway, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear her instructions. The man didn't try the door. He didn't pound or break in. He just stood there, watching. Then, without a sound, he turned and vanished into the woods. I told the operator he was gone, but she told me to stay inside, that officers were on their way. I stayed on the line, shaking, staring out the window for any sign of movement. About 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed outside the front of the house. 2 officers arrived, checked the yard, the back porch, the woods. Nothing. No footprints, no signs anyone had even been there. They were kind if a little skeptical, saying it was probably a drifter or someone passing through, but there were no shelters around here. No hikers. No one just passing through that deep into the woods. Still, they said they'd patrol the area and told me to call again if anything else happened. I double-checked every door and window before going to bed, jumping at every creak and groan the old house made. I barely slept. But the next morning, with the sun out and birds chirping, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. That is, until I went out to the back door to get some fresh air and saw something that made my stomach twist. Scratched into the wooden frame of the door right at eye level were 4 words, carved deep and deliberate with something sharp. I know you're alone. The message carved into the wood. I know you're alone. Burned into my mind like a brand. Something I couldn't shake even if I wanted to. I must have stared at it for a full minute before my brain caught up to the situation, and when it did, it hit like a train. This wasn't just some random guy wandering through the woods. He'd been watching me. He knew I was home alone. That, Realization shifted the entire atmosphere of the house, warping the walls around me like some invisible weight had settled in, heavy and suffocating. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting to the tree line behind the backyard, wondering how long he'd been out there. Watching, waiting. The police hadn't found any footprints or tracks, but maybe that was the point. He didn't want to be found. I locked the back door again, checked every window, and pulled all the curtains shut, sealing myself inside the house like a bunker. Every shadow felt darker now. Every sound, a branch cracking, the hum of the fridge, the pipes groaning, felt sinister. My parents weren't due back until Sunday night, and it was only Saturday morning. That meant I had more than 24 hours of being completely alone in a house that no longer felt like mine. I called them, of course, told them what had happened. My mom freaked out, offering to come back right away, but I insisted they stay. Part of me trying to play it cool, the other part hoping I could convince myself it was a one-time scare. Maybe he was just a drifter. Maybe the message was old, and I hadn't noticed it before. But deep down, I knew better. I stayed inside all day, trying to distract myself with TV, music, even some homework, but my eyes kept drifting to the back door, like a magnet pulling me back to that message. That night, I decided I wouldn't sleep upstairs. My room felt too disconnected from the rest of the house. Instead, I made a little nest of pillows and blankets on the couch in the living room, keeping the lights on and the curtains drawn. I kept a kitchen knife next to me, just in case. The hours crawled. Midnight came and went. At around 2:30 in the morning, I must have drifted off, because I woke up to a noise that wasn't part of any dream. It was real, sharp and close. A tap, then another, coming from the glass on the back door. I shot up, every hair on my body, standing straight up. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. 3 more taps. Slower this time, like he was making sure I heard it. I grabbed my phone and peeked between the curtain slats. My heart sank. He was back. Same figure, same hooded jacket. But this time he wasn't just watching. He had something in his hand. It looked like a crowbar. He stood there, swaying slightly, then raised it and rapped it gently against the glass again, like he was testing how much force it would take to shatter it. I ducked away from the window and called 911. Again, same dispatcher. She recognized my voice immediately, told me officers were on their way, but they were miles out and I had no idea how long it would take. Meanwhile, he wasn't waiting. I heard the metallic scrape of the crowbar against the doorframe, then a creak. He was trying the handle, trying to wedge it open. My mind was screaming, "Get out, hide, do something," but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen. Then came the sound that finally jolted me into action, the sharp crack of wood splintering. He was breaking the frame. I bolted toward the front door, planning to run to the neighbor's place down the road. But just as I reached for the knob, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A whisper, not outside, inside, from the hallway near the kitchen. I said, "I know you're alone." It wasn't loud. It was barely more than breath, but it was unmistakably coming from inside the house. I spun around, knife in hand, scanning every shadow. The back door was still closed, but how? I had just heard it cracking open, and that voice, it didn't come from behind me. It came from the hall, from deeper in the house. That's when it hit me. What if there were 2 of them? What if the guy at the back door was a distraction? I backed up into the foyer, heart slamming in my chest, trying not to make a sound. I dialed 911 again, whispering that I thought someone was inside the house now. The dispatcher kept me on the line, told me to get somewhere safe and wait. I whispered that I didn't know where safe was anymore. I heard footsteps upstairs, slow, deliberate, moving across the floorboards of my bedroom. Then silence. Then laughter. It was faint but high-pitched, almost like a child's, and it wasn't coming from upstairs anymore. It was coming from the basement door. I hadn't even checked it earlier. It was supposed to be locked, but had I actually checked it last night? I crept over slowly and reached for the handle. It was unlocked. Not just unlocked, it was slightly open. I pushed it closed and locked it with trembling fingers, but just as the bolt slid into place, something pounded against the other side of the door. Hard. Once, twice, then silence. The police arrived 10 minutes later, bursting in with flashlights and weapons drawn. They searched the entire house, attic to basement. Nothing. No one. But they did find something strange in the crawl space near the water heater, a pile of blankets, empty food wrappers, a pair of worn shoes. Someone had been living there for days, maybe longer. There were small holes in the vents too, big enough to listen through, big enough to speak through. Speak through. Whoever was watching me hadn't just been in the woods. He'd been inside the house the entire time. The police never found him. My parents came home that night, and we didn't speak much about what happened, mostly because there wasn't much to say. I moved out the next year, went to college in a big city, got as far away from that house as I could. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed and the room is still, I think I hear something, a whisper in the vent, a tap at the glass, and sometimes I swear I can still hear the words carved into the back of my mind. I know you're alone. I never thought moving into a new place could be both the best and worst decision of my life, but that's exactly what happened when I took over the lease on a small second-floor apartment just outside Chicago. It was cozy, affordable, and came, fully furnished, which was a miracle considering how broke I was after graduating college. I had just landed a job editing audio for a podcast company, and working remotely meant I spent a lot of time indoors, headphones on, my world filtered through layers of sound waves and voices that weren't mine. The apartment had a certain charm to it, old wooden floors that creaked a little too easily, radiators that clanked when the heat came on, and walls that felt unusually thin, but I chalked it up to character. My neighbors were mostly quiet, and for the first month or so things were fine, until I started noticing sounds in the vents. At first it was subtle, scratching like maybe a mouse or something, nothing major. But then it turned into something else, little thumps, clicks, and even whispers. I remember taking off my headphones one night after finishing a long editing session and hearing what I thought was someone talking in the ductwork. I pressed my ear to the vent near the baseboard, in my living room, but the voice was too muffled to make out. Still, it unsettled me. The next day, I asked my downstairs neighbor, an older woman named June, if she'd been watching TV loudly or if she had someone over the night before. She looked at me with this strange expression and shook her head. I go to bed by 9. Haven't had company in years, she said. That should have been the first real warning. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe sound traveled weirdly through the old pipes or ducts. But the more I listened, the more I realized these voices didn't belong to anyone in the building. They were coming from the vent system itself. Not just once or twice a night, no. I began hearing them regularly. Sometimes at 3 a.m., sometimes in the middle of the afternoon when no one else should have been home. They whispered things, long, quiet monologues that made my skin crawl, even though I couldn't make out the words clearly. It didn't help that I started waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling like someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. One night, I had finally had enough. I grabbed a flashlight, unscrewed the front vent cover in the living room, and shone the beam inside. There wasn't much, just dust and the long tunnel of ductwork, but then something glinted in the far corner, just out of reach. I used a bent coat hanger to pull it closer. It was a small digital voice recorder, covered in grime and wrapped in a rubber band. I held it like it might bite me, and I honestly debated just tossing it in the trash. But curiosity won out. I cleaned it off, popped in fresh batteries, and hit play. At first, all I heard was static. Then the recording kicked in. A voice. Soft. Male, maybe in his 20s. Log 1, March 3rd. I think someone's in the walls. That line alone gave me full-body chills. The recording went on for a few minutes. He described noises, whispered phrases coming through the vents, the same things I had been hearing. Sometimes it says my name, he whispered. Sometimes it just breathes. But I know it's not a neighbor, it's too close. It's in the system, watching. The next recording was dated 2 days later. He sounded more panicked. It moved again. I know it moved. I blocked the hallway vent last night and this morning it was open. I keep hearing scratching in the bedroom ceiling. I called the landlord, but he didn't believe me. He went on to describe dreams he'd been having, about being dragged through narrow tunnels, of someone whispering into his ears while he slept. That's when I paused the recording and set the device down. Something about the voice. It sounded too familiar. I replayed it a few more times, and that's when it hit me. It wasn't just any guy, it was the last tenant. I had seen his name on the lease when I signed it. Chris Bellamy. He'd left abruptly, according to the landlord, didn't. Leave a forwarding address. Just moved out in the middle of the night. At the time, I thought nothing of it. People flake all the time. But hearing his voice, hearing his growing fear captured on that recorder, it did something to me. I suddenly felt like I had stepped into a trap that had been waiting for me the entire time. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound felt like a threat. Every creak of the floor, every rustle in the vent. I put the recorder in a drawer and tried to forget about it. Tried to convince myself it was just some paranoid breakdown recorded by a guy who couldn't handle isolation. But the sounds didn't stop. If anything, they got worse, louder, more deliberate. And then one night I heard a voice I couldn't explain. It wasn't coming from the recorder. It wasn't an echo from a neighbor. It came from right behind my bedroom vent. Clear, direct, and spoken in a voice I instantly recognized. My own. "I know you're listening," it said. "You shouldn't have found it." I didn't sleep at all after that. That night, after I heard my own voice coming from the vent, something broke inside me. Something foundational. It was like the rules of reality had been tampered with. I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, every nerve in my body screaming to run, to flee the apartment. But I didn't. I just stared at the vent, frozen, waiting for something else to happen. But it didn't speak again. The silence was almost worse. I barely moved the rest of the night, and when the sun finally rose, I didn't feel relieved. The daylight didn't make anything feel safer. It just made the dread easier to see. I tried to talk myself down, tell myself it was a dream, maybe a trick of my exhausted brain mixing recordings with the ambient noise of the building, but part of me knew better. Part of me understood something had shifted, and not in some vague metaphorical sense. There was something in this apartment, something wrong. The next morning I dug the voice recorder back out and spent hours listening to every clip stored on it. There were dozens, some just a few seconds of whispering, others long ramblings of Chris talking to himself, documenting his mental state as it deteriorated. The last few entries were almost too painful to hear. In one, he sobbed quietly for minutes, whispering, "It knows I found it," over and over again. Another one was just him breathing, but it was ragged, like he was running or hiding. But the final entry chilled me the most, not because of what he said, but because it wasn't him speaking at all. The final audio file on the device was a woman's voice, soft, repetitive. She said one sentence over and over again. "I'm not in the walls, I'm in you." She said it 11 times. On the 12th, she said my name, not Chris's, mine. I dropped the recorder and stumbled back, knocking over a chair. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. I just stared at it like it might start moving on its own. That evening, I left the apartment for the first time in days. I stayed out until midnight, walking aimlessly through the city just to avoid going back. But eventually I had to. I had nowhere else to go. When I returned, I noticed something immediately, something subtle but impossible to ignore. The voice recorder was gone. I never told anyone I had it. I didn't throw it away. I left it on the floor after it scared me half to death, and now it was just gone. I searched every inch of the apartment, every drawer, cabinet, cushion. Nothing. That night I kept all the lights on and laid in bed, fully clothed, phone in hand, ready to bolt at the first sound. But nothing happened. No voices. No scratching. Just silence. Until 4:12 a.m. I know the time exactly because I was staring at the clock when I heard it. A soft metallic click, followed by a thud. It came from the hallway. I stepped out slowly, barefoot, heart pounding. The front door was wide open. Not just unlocked, open. I hadn't touched it, hadn't heard it move, but it stood there like an invitation, revealing the dark stairwell beyond. I closed it, locked it, double-checked everything, and backed away. That's when I saw it, propped up against the vent in the hallway floor. The voice recorder. It was back. I didn't touch it. I didn't dare touch it. I stared at it for a full hour, sitting cross-legged at the other end of the hallway like it might lunge at me. Eventually, I grabbed a pair of tongs from the kitchen, picked the recorder up and dropped it in a shoebox. I taped the box shut and shoved it in a backpack, then left the apartment again, this time taking a cab across town to the lake. I walked out to the edge of the pier and chucked the recorder as far into the water as I could. I watched it splash and sink beneath the surface. It was over, or so I thought. That night, back in bed, I finally began to relax. I even laughed a little. It all felt absurd in hindsight. Sleep came easier. I drifted off around 1:30 a.m. and then 3:17 a.m. I woke up to the sound of my own voice whispering from the vent. "You shouldn't have thrown it away," I screamed. No shame, no hesitation. I bolted from the room, grabbing my keys, wallet, phone, didn't even put on shoes. I drove to a friend's house across town, pounded on their door until they let me in. I told them I had a break-in. I lied. I couldn't even begin to explain what was happening. I didn't go back to the apartment for a week. When I finally did, I brought backup. My brother and his friend, both big guys who laughed off ghost stories, they helped me pack everything. We didn't stay long, but as we were leaving, my brother asked something that made my stomach drop. "Hey, did you record something in here before you left?" I told him no. He looked confused and pointed at the vent near the door. "There's this little blinking red light inside. Looks like a mic or something." I didn't check. I couldn't. I just left. I moved in with a cousin, and since then I've never stayed in a place longer than a year. I sleep with earplugs. I don't use vents for heat or AC anymore, portable heaters only. And I never ever listen to voice recordings alone. Because here's the thing, sometimes I still hear it, my voice. In places I've never recorded, saying things I don't remember saying, whispering my name from across the room. It always starts the same way, a static hum, a short, breathy laugh, and then the phrase always the same, "You shouldn't have found it." It started with something small, something insignificant, a feeling, a lingering thought, just on the edge of my awareness. I had been living alone for a few months in an apartment downtown, a high-rise on the edge of the city, tucked into a quiet corner of the building where no one seemed to bother me. I liked the solitude. The apartment was mostly modern, the kind that came with sleek fixtures and large windows that offered a sweeping view of the city below. I could hear the hum of life outside, the distant buzz of traffic and the occasional whoosh of a car speeding by on the freeway below. It was the kind of place you could lose yourself in, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed out of place, until it was. It was a late Friday night when I first noticed the reflection. I had just come home from a long week of work, and as usual I stripped off my jacket and slumped onto the couch, flipping through the channels. I wasn't thinking much about anything, just zoning out, trying to unwind. But then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure in the window. It wasn't anyone on the street below. There were no shadows or figures in the building across from mine. I wasn't expecting to see anything at all, but there it was, someone standing behind me in the reflection of the glass. For just a moment, I thought it was my own image, something I hadn't caught in my peripheral vision. But as I turned to look, the figure moved. It wasn't me, it was a man. I jumped to my feet, my heart racing. I whipped around, half expecting someone to be standing in my living room. But there was nothing. Just the empty apartment, lit only by the dim light of my TV. I went to the window, checking it. It was locked, the blinds pulled tightly against the glass, the street far below empty. I felt my pulse return to normal, shaking my head at myself. It was nothing, I thought, just a trick of the light. Maybe the shadows of the furniture had created the illusion of a man standing behind me. But as I turned back to my couch, I saw it again. This time it was clear. The man was standing by the window in the reflection just behind me, staring into the apartment. I could see the details now. His face, pale and sickly looking, his eyes wide and unblinking. His mouth was twisted into a strange, almost mocking grin. And there was something about him that felt wrong. I whirled around and again there was nothing there. I checked the whole apartment, every room, closet, and the small balcony off the living room. I opened the bathroom door and checked the shower, even though I knew no one could have gotten in. I was alone. Yet the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It lingered, a cold presence just outside my line of sight. I thought about calling the landlord, maybe getting someone to come over, but I didn't. Part of me felt embarrassed. I was alone in the city, living in a big apartment building, surrounded by hundreds of other people. There was no reason for me to be scared. It had to be my imagination. But then the reflection kept coming back. Every time I'd glance at the window, I'd see him, just standing there, watching me. Over the next few nights, I tried to dismiss it as stress or a trick of the light. But each time I'd look, he was closer, standing a little further inside the room, his expression a little more grotesque. I could feel my heart race every time I saw him, even though I knew no one was actually in the apartment with me. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I was exhausted from the constant feeling of being watched. My nerves were shot, and every time I walked past the window, I expected to see him there waiting. That's when I decided to take action. I moved the couch away from the window, trying to avoid being in the direct line of sight of the reflection. I taped up the blinds, locked everything, and went to bed with the TV off, the apartment dark and quiet. I thought that would fix it. But it didn't. That night I woke up to the sound of someone moving through my apartment, soft steps on the hardwood floor. I froze, listening, my breath shallow. The sound stopped for a moment. Then I heard something I didn't expect, a slow, deliberate knock, not on the door but on the window. The glass was tapping, a rhythmic sound as if someone was testing the window, knocking just to make sure I heard it. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my phone, ready to call the police if I had to. But when I turned on the light and looked, there was nothing. The apartment was empty. Everything was just as I had left it. But then I glanced at the window. The blinds were still closed, the glass opaque. And yet, I could see him again. There he was, standing in the reflection, his face inches away from the glass, pressing his palms against it like he was trying to get closer. His eyes locked on me, his grin growing wider, more distorted. That's when I ran. I grabbed my keys and fled the apartment, not caring that I had left everything behind. I stayed with a friend that night and I didn't return for days. When I finally did go back, I found the apartment just as I had left it, still and silent. No more reflections, no more figures in the window. I thought maybe it was over. I thought maybe it had all been a figment of my imagination. But then, I saw something else. In the corner of the living room, a photograph had appeared on the floor. I don't know how it got there. I hadn't seen it before. It was an old black and white photo of a man standing in front of a building. The same man, the one I had seen in the reflection. His eyes were wide, his grin twisted just like before. And written on the back of the photo in faded, spidery handwriting were two words: "You're next." I didn't stay another night. I couldn't. I packed up whatever I could grab and left the apartment for good. It's been months now and I've tried to move on, but I can't shake the feeling. Every time I look in a mirror, I half expect to see him standing there behind me, waiting, watching. And the worst part? Sometimes, when I turn quickly enough, I think I do see him. Just a fleeting glimpse, a shadow in the corner of my vision. Don't know if he's real. I don't know if he was ever really there, but the reflection, it's still there. And I still feel him following me. I spent weeks running from the truth, from the haunting feeling that there was something attached. To me, something that couldn't be shaken off so easily. After leaving the apartment, I stayed with friends in various places around the city, trying to feel normal again. But every time I passed a reflective surface, a window, a mirror, even the polished surface of a countertop, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The memory of the man's grin, that twisted, mocking smile, would flash in my mind. I couldn't escape it. I didn't know what he wanted or why he was following me, but the more I tried to forget, the worse it became. The feeling that I was being watched never went away. One night I woke up in a friend's guest bedroom, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. The nightmare was still vivid in my mind. I had been standing in front of a mirror in my old apartment, staring at my reflection, and just like before, the man had appeared, his face slowly leaning toward mine as if trying to press through the glass. The worst part? This time, he whispered something to me. It wasn't clear at first, just a faint murmur. But then it became louder, more distinct. "I've been here all along, you can't hide from me." I jerked upright, my breath rapid and shallow. It took me a moment to realize I was no longer in my apartment. I wasn't even in my old neighborhood. I was safe, or so I told myself. I grabbed my phone, checked the time, it was 3:30 a.m., and then I went back to sleep. But the unease lingered. The next morning I woke up with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. My phone buzzed and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. "Don't bother running. You can't escape. I'll always find you." I stared at the message, my fingers trembling as I typed a response. "Who is this?" I wrote, but the message didn't send. It just hung there, frozen. I tried again, but it was the same. The message wouldn't go through. Panic surged through me as I checked the settings. Everything seemed fine. I hadn't received any messages like this in weeks. Then I realized this wasn't a random message. The number had the same area code as my old apartment. I couldn't stay at my friend's house any longer. I had to leave. It felt like the man was closing in on me, his presence pressing down on me like a vice. I told my friend I needed some space, that I was going away for a while to clear my head. She didn't argue. I packed my things and left without another word. But as I stepped out into the street, I felt a chill as if someone was standing just behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone close, but there was no one, just the empty street. I tried to block out the feeling, tried to focus on the mundane, everyday tasks. But even after finding a new place to stay in a different part of town, things didn't improve. The man kept coming back, haunting every reflection, every mirror, every piece of glass I passed. He wasn't just confined to the windows anymore. He started showing up in my dreams too. He'd stand there waiting, always smiling, that terrible grin. The more time passed, the more I realized that there was no escaping him. I felt like I was unraveling. The line between waking and dreaming began to blur, and soon enough I wasn't sure if I was still in control of my own mind. It was as if he had seeped into my consciousness, like a shadow that followed me everywhere. One evening, as I sat at my new apartment, I decided to take action. I couldn't go on like this. I needed to confront the man, to understand who or what he was and why he was haunting me. I wasn't sure how I would do it, but I knew I had to. I had to find a way to end this. I went to the library, hoping to find something, anything that could explain what was happening. I spent hours searching, flipping through books about paranormal phenomena, urban legends, even psychological disorders that might cause people to hallucinate. But nothing I read seemed to fit. Then, just as I was about to give up, I found something. It was an old article from a local newspaper, dated 1953, with the headline, "Mysterious Disappearance in Downtown. High-rise, no evidence of foul play." The article detailed a man named Robert Clark, who had disappeared from an apartment in the very building I had lived in. According to the piece, Robert was a well-liked resident who had worked in a nearby office building, but one night he simply vanished. His neighbors reported hearing strange noises in his apartment days before he disappeared, scratching sounds, whispers, things moving in the walls. It all sounded familiar, but there was one detail in the article that made my stomach turn. The description of his apartment matched mine exactly. The same layout, the same view. And the article mentioned something else. Robert had been obsessed with his reflection. His friends and family reported that he spent hours staring into mirrors, sometimes for days on end. His behavior became erratic, and eventually he started muttering about seeing things in the glass. Things that weren't there. It dawned on me then, Robert hadn't just disappeared. He had become the man in the reflection. Somehow, his obsession had transformed him, trapping him in the glass, making him a part of the building. A reflection. That couldn't be escaped. I didn't know how, but I knew what I had to do. I had to go back to that apartment, back to the place where it all began, and find a way to confront whatever had trapped Robert, and now me, inside the glass.